Hi guys, I'm sorry I can't be with you this weekend. I am painting with the British Association for the Decorative and Folk Arts, and I've been very excited about this workshop. We're Zooming with some fantastic painters from the UK, so that's going to be a lot of fun for me, but that left you without a live. So I thought that I would record this project. This is our Soups on Shelf sitter. I hate using that term because I always mess it up. So this, I'm going to call it a sill sitter. There we go. Our little Soups on sill sitter. This little pig is so cute and he's very easy to paint. It's a fun technique, a neat little twist on stenciling, and a very easy to paint little cabbage rows. So you're going to enjoy this one, I can promise you. So if you guys are ready to get started on our little Soups on kitchen pig, so am I. So this is the piece that we're going to paint today, this little Soups on pig. I think he's so cute, makes such a great little piece for the kitchen. And if Soups on is not to your taste, the pattern does have a variety of lettering choices in it. So we have something more than just Soups on. And then this great little technique for these pretty little cabbage roses. This is such an easy technique, and I think you'll really enjoy painting this. We're going to do a little twist on stenciling, and in the end, we're going to have this fabulous little sill sitter, this little kitchen pig that says Soups on, or be happy, or whatever you want it to say. We've got a variety of lettering choices in that pattern. So we're going to have some fun with this one. We're going to start with this surface, although you don't have to do this on this surface. This is easily translated to any variety of surfaces. So if you don't have a little piggy handy, dig through your stash. You're bound to find something that will work really well. The other thing we're going to do with this piece is apply this nifty little stand on the back. This comes with this pig. You get this nifty little kickstand for it. Super easy to put on. I'm going to show you how to do that towards the end. And it just makes this little guy sit up very nicely, perfect on a windowsill or on a kitchen shelf. You're going to love it. So to get started on our little piggy is we have one coat of lamp black. Now I've added a little bit of all-purpose sealer to my base coat because it just gives it a nice finish in the end. So we've got lamp black. The first color we're going to use for this piece is this. This is cobblestone. This is a nice warm gray. I like using this on black backgrounds because it has a much more subtle contrast as opposed to white. White is very bright, very harsh, and I like a softer and more subtle contrast. So we're going to use this cobblestone. It's a really nice color, by the way. I love this warm tone. So we're going to use that, and the brush I'm using is a 1/4 inch or a 3/8 inch, sorry, Dynasty Stencil Pro stencil brush. I'm a big fan. I love these. The synthetic stencil brush is just the bee's knees, works like a hot damn. So circular fashion to load it up, small amount of paint. You don't need a lot of paint for this. Make sure you take a minute to blot it on paper towel. Now I'm using a 1/4 inch check stencil. You could leave it as a check if you want to. That's entirely up to you. But I wanted sort of a twist on that. So I'm turning it on the diagonal. And we're going to start with a more opaque at this end. And we're going to gradually let it fade out as it comes to about maybe the halfway mark, maybe slightly less than halfway. So apply cobblestone, circular fashion, change directions frequently. We don't want full coverage. We want to gradually let this color fade out a little bit. Neatness doesn't count. Perfection is definitely to be avoided at all cost. So I think that'll do it. So I don't want these to be fully opaque. I want them to have sort of a distressed feel, and I want them to gradually fade as they come in towards the center. And I think we accomplished that quite neatly. So I'm going to dry that really well just to make sure it's good and dry. Just like this. And then we're going to give it a light sanding just to distress it a little bit. I want to wear the edges of our pig just a little bit. Now, you can do as much of this or as little as you like. That's entirely up to you. If you want it heavily distressed, really worn and tattered, go for it. Do whatever your little heart desires. I'm just going to wear the edges a little. I'm going to pay attention to those corners because I like the corners worn. A little bit at the edges. A little distressing goes a long way. You can do some really nice things with this design-wise. So, I think that's enough. And then I'm going to take the fine side of my sander and I'm going to just lightly distress the top of this. Just like so. One direction. I just want to soften this a little bit. I don't want it to be really heavily distressed, but I want it soft. Then I'll take a piece of shop towel or paper towel and just wipe away some of that dust. Now our second color here is something to age this a little and also to warm up this black a little bit, just so it doesn't look quite so cold. So I'm going to use a little bit of asphaltum on my palette. And I'm going to use a piece of shop towel or paper towel in a little bundle like this. And we're going to apply asphaltum over the whole thing. So a little bit of asphaltum on the cloth. And we're going to, circular fashion, just apply a little wash of asphaltum over everything. Neatness doesn't count, and perfection is to be avoided at all costs. I kind of like seeing, a few swirl marks, a little bit of brown streaks here and there. That appeals. So that's about all it needs. Just a little bit over everything. And then I'm going to dry this really well. And then we're going to trace and transfer our line drawing on. Now this is super simple because I'm going to use a tool for this. So nice and dry. You don't want to try and trace a line drawing onto a surface of fresh paint without making sure it's very, very dry, because the tracing will be very difficult to do. I did a little prep ahead of time. So I line up that bottom line and this side with the edge of my pig. The top part doesn't really matter. I cut most of that off anyway. Now, one of my favorite tools when I paint is this. This is just a circle maker or a circle template. I have a variety of them in different sizes. They're very handy, especially when you're tracing things that are round. Berries, circular, anything that's circular. Having one of these makes sure that round things stay round. So it makes things a whole lot easier to trace. So I'm going to start with my lettering. I'm going to use my red gel pen and I'm going to trace my lettering on like so. I like the red gel pen because then I can see where I've been. And I'm less likely to forget things if I can see where I've missed. So there we go. Don't forget that apostrophe. Now I used soups on. There are a selection of different words and sentences and phrases in the pattern that you can choose if you're not keen on the soups on thing. So you don't have to do that. You can do whatever your heart desires. I also used a handwritten script, something that looks more handwritten as opposed to, a formal font, so that you could pick and choose whatever you wanted to do. So if you wanted to put a different lettering choice on there, you can do that. You don't have to do precisely what I've used. You could also use stamps or stencils to put your lettering on if that's what you'd like to do. So whatever saying you choose to put on is going to work just fine. So I've traced all my leaves first. And those little vines and tendrils, I like my vines and tendrils to make sure I didn't mess anything up. Nope. And then I'm going to use my shape maker. I just find the circle that matches the size of the flower. And that's what I use to trace my circles. It just keeps your flowers, anything circular, nice and neat, and it keeps them circular. Round things should be round, and this just makes things a whole lot simpler when you use a template like this. And if you have a pretty steady hand, you can trace the larger circles by hand. Now, at this point, I don't bother with the details inside the flower simply because, oops, I missed a flower. Hello. There we go. Simply because we're going to base coat everything, so, and you'll lose it anyhow. Come on. So, there, I have my lettering on and I have my flowers on. Put the graphite paper away. Now, I'm using a small filbert to do my base coats. In this particular case, filbert or a round brush will work very well. And I'm going to start with a little bit of warm white. Because we're using pinks or reddish pinks or corals, they have a tendency to be a little on the transparent side. So I am going to have a hard time getting really good coverage out of those colors. Not only that, but they're going to be affected by that black background, and so the colors tend to be grayed out a little bit or a little subdued by all that black. So we don't want that. We want nice bright colors. So I like to take just one coat of warm white and base coat my flowers. That way I get nice bright pinks, nice bright corals, and all my colors show up really nicely. And they're not as heavily influenced by all that black. So a little bit of warm white over top of those flowers, and we will have nice bright colors. Now the colors that I chose for these roses are tea berry and vintage pink. Two colors I am particularly fond of. I love tea berry. I think it's just a really dynamic coral tone with a nice, a heavier red than usual. So it's not quite so pastel. It's a very vibrant coral tone. And then the vintage pink that I chose is one of my favorite pinks. And I know Dagwart makes quite a few of them, but vintage is one of my favorites. It's just such a rich tone, and it's slightly grayed out, and it's warm, and it's yummy, and it plays up really nicely next to this tea berry. So I'm going to make sure this white is nice and dry. And I'm going to switch to a smaller round. I'm using a 0 round. And the color for our leaves is lush green. If you don't have a 0 round, you can use a 0 rigger. It will work just fine. So our leaves are all base coated with lush green. One coat will do because we're going to be putting shading and highlighting on top of this green, so we don't need to have more than one coat. The shading and highlighting will take care of any areas that are perhaps a little thin. If you don't have lush green, antique green will work just fine. I like the vintage tone of this green as well, and it works really nicely with that vintage pink. So little leaves, again, tiny little leaves. That lush green is so pretty. And it works well on this black. It covers well on this black. And I wanted a deep green for this. It's just a nice tone. Next weekend, we are doing the third in the series of these little farmhouse sill sitters. Each one is a simple project, but I'm focusing on some really simple ways to paint flowers and to do simple backgrounds. I think it was time to do something a little more basic. I've been doing a lot of fairly elaborate pieces of late, so I was kind of looking forward to something really simple that would be ideal for absolute beginners or even intermediates and still be a fun project. So I'm going to dry that really well, and we'll be ready to base coat our flowers. So I'm going to grab my filbert again, make sure it's rinsed. The first color we're going to use is tea berry. This is that vibrant, oh so pretty coral tone called tea berry. I love the energy of this color. It's just so vibrant. And we're probably going to use two colors to base, two coats, good grief, to base coat these roses. So 2 coats of tea berry. Make sure each coat is dry, well dry, before you try to put the next one on, so that you get really nice coverage. Try to get it as even as possible, so that you get, a nice look to it. And I think the second flower I'm going to do is this little one back here. And I'll base coat this one with the tea berry. I really love this color, and this year they put out a new one in the same ballpark, but it almost has a neon quality to it. It doesn't cover quite as well as this tea berry does, but it is so vibrant. And it's just a second and I'll show you. It's this one, it's called Coral Buzz. And it is almost a neon tone. Doesn't show up that well on the camera, unfortunately, but it has a nice, vibrant tone to it that is really, really pretty. It doesn't cover quite as well as tea berry, but almost. So I'm going to dry that real quick, and we'll put on a second coat just to make sure we've got fairly even coverage. Here we go. Oh, that's perfect. 2 coats is plenty. I just want it to be fairly even. It doesn't have to be fully opaque, but it should be reasonably even. There we go. So the rest of these flowers on here are going to be base coated with vintage pink, which is this tone. Years ago, it would have been known as like a dusty rose, but this one has a really nice vintage feel to it. A little grayed out, but still has lots of zing to it. I really love this color, and it pairs up really nicely with this coral, with this tea berry. And it picks up on those coral tones very nicely. So it's also a bit more opaque than the tea berry, just a little. So we might get away with 1 coat. I think we will, yeah. Love this color. This vintage pink is just yummy. This one reminds me of like 1920s, 1930s. It just has a really nice antique feel to it. And it's quite an elegant color, especially when it's paired with like a champagne gold or a gold. It's just lovely. It's very feminine without being over the top, if you know what I mean. I actually have a sweater this color, and I just love it. So Oops, I'm knocking everything over here today. I'm going to dry that, and I think I'll give it one more coat, just, you know, just to be generous. Yeah, I could have gotten away with one, but in for a penny, in for a pound, so they say. So there we go. So I have pink roses. So I'm going to make sure this is good and dry. And we're going to shade the leaves with either plantation pine or black green. You can use either or. I like black green. I also love plantation pine. I like the tone of it. It's either one of those colors gives you a really nice vintage look. It's transparent enough that it gives you nice shadows, nice depth of color, and dark enough that it gives you a really rich look. I'm using a little bit of black green because that's what I have handy. And I'm going to shade up underneath the rose and where the petals, where the leaves overlap each other on these bigger leaves. Just like that. I'm using a 3/8 angled shader. It's my favorite size for surfaces like this. It's big enough to give you a nice float and small enough that you can get into all those little tight spots. 3/8 tends to be the one I grab the most for smaller projects. Now for all of those tiny little leaves, it's just a little float at the base of the leaf where it joins the stem. Little U-shaped float, doesn't have to be much, but it's just a little U shape, and it just gives that leaf a little shape. That's it. Super easy to get that little float in there. This piece works up very quickly. Now you're going to shade down the center vein on the larger leaves, but not on the small ones. It's just not necessary. But I do like a nice little shadow down the center vein on these larger leaves like that. It just helps make the leaf look a little more dimensional and give them a little shape. Just like that. Doesn't have to be perfect. Now to highlight those leaves, we're using a little bit of this. This is margarita. I tend to use a high yellow green to highlight leaves for a couple of reasons. One, you get nice contrast, nice soft colors. They're opaque enough that they're going to give you the light, transparent enough that you get really nice floats and nice shadows. So I like this margarita. It has nice quality. It's a really bright green. And it looks really great on this lush green that I use. So small amount. You do not need a lot of green paint on your brush for this. Teeny tiny. Look at that. Not much. Brush it out. You don't want it full strength. You're going to brush it out a little bit. And we're going to do the left side and the right side of each leaf and then down the center vein like so. So that you get this. Gives you a nice contrast. Down the left, up the right, down the center vein. Gives you a nice soft highlight right where you need it. There we go. So all of those larger leaves get this. Don't forget to do the center vein. A little highlight on that. And then all of the smaller ones just get a little float at the tip of the leaf. So you did a U-shaped float at the base of the leaf. You're going to do the very same thing at the tip of the leaf. Little U-shaped float. Very simple. It's a thinned margarita. You're not using this color full strength. it's a strong and obnoxious color if you do. Just saying. So our highlighting and shading is done on these leaves. But before we start working on those roses, I'm going to take my liner brush and a little bit of that margarita. You're going to thin it out. We want it about the consistency of milk. And then you're going to pick up a small amount of that warm white and add it to that margarita. And again, it should be the consistency of milk. And this is the color you're going to use to paint all of those little vines and stems and tendrils. So anything that's connecting leaves to flowers, tendrils, etc., gets this thinned margarita with that touch of warm white. That warm white is only there to make that color a little more opaque. That's the only reason it's there. So those are your little vines and tendrils. And then that same color is going to be used for this. I love this. Using a squiggly line to outline your leaves. Can go on the leaf, off the leaf, it doesn't matter. It's just a squiggly little line. It just makes the leaves look a little less solid. It gives them a softer appearance. And if you want to, you can put in a little highlight on the center vein. Just a little stroke. As I said, this color is heavily thinned. It should be the consistency of milk. It's just going to add that little detail to the edges of the leaves. Super easy. Don't overthink it. Just little stroke on that center vein. Doesn't have to be much, but that little bit of outline, pick up a little more paint here. That little bit of an outline is enough to make these leaves stand out against that black, but it also softens them a little so they don't look so hard edged. Gives them a little curlicue. Don't forget. Oh, I missed a vine. Good heavens. There we go. There. That's what I like. I like those little delicate outlines on things. It just makes the leaves look a little softer. So you can rinse out your liner. Don't put it too far away because you're going to be using it again shortly. So one of my favorite tools is this. This is a Bohin seamstress chalk. It has a nice fine line. And I'm going to use that to draw in the details on our roses. So I'm going to dry that well. So that I don't smear little vines and tendrils. And we're going to draw a crescent. And in this case, it's going to go like this. We're going to turn one part of that rose to a crescent moon. And then another crescent going this way. And then I'm going to connect the two to create a triangle in the center. And then I'm going to go across the corners of that triangle like so. And create another triangle. And I'm going to continue to do that inside the center of this flower. Like that. So that we end up with a triangle in the middle. And each of the flowers is shaped that way. So crescent moon, connect them across the corners, across those corners, until you get a triangle. Now you can do this with a pencil. If you don't have a chalk pencil, you can do it with a pencil. It will work just fine. I just like the chalk pencil because I can see very clearly, especially on darker colors. And I can just wipe this off with a little bit of water. It cleans up very easily. So this is how you create that little rosebud, that little cabbage rose, is just with this little triangle shape. Now on the smaller roses, of course, you don't have to worry about getting that super detailed look. That's all you need to do. So this is what your flowers should look like once you've got them drawn on there. Now, if you don't want to tackle it doing freehand, just grab your line drawing, line it back up over top of it, and then trace it from there. Now with that bowhin pen, you don't have to leave that chalk out. Just press it down and push it back in, and then your chalk is protected. You don't have to worry about it breaking off in your pencil box. So we have roses that are ready to paint. Now I'm using a 3/8 Dynasty Black Gold angled shader. And the color that I'm going to shade all of these flowers with is this one. This is Cranberry Wine. Now, it seems like a very dark color to be using on all of these, but there's a method to my madness. I'm using Cranberry Wine because one, it's very transparent, and two, it's going to give us that nice rich tone that we want. So I'm picking up a small amount of Cranberry Wine, and I do mean small amount, just a little bit. And you're going to blend it well on your palette. You don't want this color full strength because it's very strong. And we're going to shade up against that longest line, that longest crescent, like that. Nice little float. And you're going to do that to the longest line on all of these flowers. Every one of them. That longest curve, that first line that you drew, is getting shaded with that Cranberry Wine. Just like that. And then we're going to dry this. And you're going to shade the second longest line, which was the second line that you drew. Just like that, right to the edge. On all of them. And this is what you're going to have. It's going to kind of look like there we go. So then you're going to shade that shorter one so that you have a triangle in the center of each flower. Just like that. Now if you're using chalk, it pretty much washes it all off, but that's okay. Here we go. And then you're going to start shading into each of those triangles like that. So it forms smaller and smaller triangles inside the rose. So one corner. And from this point on, you're going to be creating a series of triangles inside each flower. Of course, the smaller flowers, you're going to stop sooner because you're not going to be able to get any smaller. But it makes the center get a little bit darker each time. So, and this creates that layer of petals, those layers and layers of petals inside a cabbage roll. And now our big rose, we've only got one more layer to do. There we go. So, once you've got all of that shading in there, Make sure it's good and dry. I missed one. There we go. So then we have to shade the outside of the rose. And I want to put the shadow on the bottom of each of these roses. So I'm going to put my float from about the halfway mark all the way along the bottom of the rose to the other side. And it's just like that. So it kind of makes the rose a little darker, but that's all right, because we're going to start adding the highlights to this. And this part is where the rose really starts to come to life. The shading just establishes the shape inside those flowers. And then when we start putting in those highlights, that's when this really starts to look like a rose. So we're going to start with this one. This is that tea berry. I'm going to pick up a small amount of tea berry on my brush. I'm trying to get my... And I'm going to blend that on my palette like so. And then I'm going to pick up a little bit of warm white. I just want to change the tea berry a little bit. And we're going to use that color to float the center of each of those petals with that lighter value. And then you're going to go inside and float each of those petals with a little bit of that as well. It's not a perfect float. It's just a stroke of color in there. So don't kill yourself trying to get that perfect little float, because it's not going to happen. So this is what it's going to look like. And you're going to do that to both of those tea berry colored roses. So this one is tucked back a bit, so we have a little bit of leeway. So little stroke of that color. There we go. We're going to do the same thing to the vintage roses, that vintage pink. I'm going to take a little of the vintage pink, and then we're going to pick up a little bit of warm white, make a lighter valued pink, and we're going to do the same thing to those pink roses. So a little stroke of that lighter value in there. And again, don't worry about these being perfect floats. They don't need to be. This rose is going to look a little chunky. And that's what it's supposed to look like. It's a cabbage rose. So not a perfect float, but it does highlight the textures inside these flowers quite nicely. And it should be just, 1/3 of the center of that flower. Typically. So 1/3. There we go. I'm going to brighten that one a little bit. There we are. So we've got that first highlight on those roses. Look how simple. And yet it gives the center of that flower a lot of depth. So now we're really going to brighten it a little. We're going to take some warm white. And we're going to blend that out on the palette. You don't want it full strength. And then in the center of that float, you're going to put a little float of warm white. Right at the edge of that flower. It's a tiny little float, more of a stroke. It's just to brighten that highlight at the center of the flower. Does not have to be perfect, but it's going to have a little bit on each of those layers and just in the center. So don't overthink this. Just at the center of that first highlight, it's a smaller stroke. Just adds a little more texture and a little more light to the center of the flower. Just like that. Here we go. So keep it loose. Don't overthink it. It doesn't need to be overthought. Now we need a highlight at the top of this rose. So we're going to take a little bit of that warm white, and on the outer edge of the top of this rose, we're going to put a little float of warm white. Same with this one. Same with this one. Just a weak float of warm white. Doesn't have to be much, but just a little, because it needs that little bit of light up there. There we go. So this is where our liner comes in. I'm going to dry this really well. And we're going to take a little bit of thinned titanium white. So I've got a little bit of titanium white here. We're going to thin some of this out. And we want this about the consistency of milk. Super thin. It has to be thin enough that it's going to flow off the brush quite nicely, but still be opaque enough to give us the color. And we're going to put a stroke of that titanium white, just a loose stroke, right over that highlight area, right at the edge of the petal. Right at the edge. And it's loose. Don't overthink it. Don't worry about whether or not it's perfectly in the place it needs to be. It's just a fine little line. It can go off the edge. It does not have to be perfectly placed. We're just looking for a little bright punch of light right at the edge of those petals. This is going to give us that extra texture at the edge. I like that little punch of light at the edge, and it softens this very nicely. Gives our petals a little extra texture. Here we go. I like that it's not perfect. I like the imperfections. It makes things more interesting. So we've got the highlight at the center. Now I want to make this flower look like it's got more petals underneath and at the outside edge. So we're going to take that thinned, heavily thinned titanium white. We're going to come close to the edge of the flower, very close, and just put a fine series of choppy little lines at the outside edge of the rose. Imperfect, not a straight line. We don't want a hard straight line all the way around the flowers. It creates sort of a subtle halo around the outside edge of the flower. Just like that. Super subtle. And you're going to do that around each of those flowers. Don't worry if they're not perfect. They don't need to be. How boring would life be if everything was perfect? Yuck. And this gives these flowers a little extra texture. It gives them a little extra dimension. And it gives them a little extra light. Softens them a little so they don't look so heavily structured. They don't look like a hard circle. And we only have a couple more little things to do to this. We're going to do the lettering, which is super simple. And then I'm going to show you a fun little way to enhance these flowers a bit. Now, I've used a little bit of marigold. You can use any yellow you want if you have a preference. I like marigold. I like because it's a little bit subtle. So I'm going to use a tiny bit of marigold. I'm going to use my liner brush, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of marigold right at the tip. And in the center of each of these flowers, I'm going to put 3 little yellow dots in a triangular shape in the center of the flower. Very tiny. Doesn't have to be huge. just to add a little color in the center, draws the eye to the center of the flower. There we go. I love it. So we've got these very pretty little cabbage roses. This is such an easy way to paint roses, and they look so nice. And like I said, you can add more texture by layering in lines. It softens the look of the flower around the outside edge, on the edge, however you want to do it. I love how this looks. It just gives these flowers a nice softness. Now, our pig needs a tail. So you have two options here. You can use a white gel pen to do your lettering and the detail for the tail. Both of these options will work very, very well. So this one is a Uniball Signo opaque white gel pen. This is my favorite gel pen. I love these. The Uniball Signos are they're an awesome gel. Great ink. It's a Sakura Japanese ink. The quality is exceptional. Great coverage. This is my latest passion, though, I have to tell you. Made by the same company, by the way. My Uniball Signo and my Posca pen. This is a 0.7 millimeter white Posca paint pen. I usually have 2 or 3 of these kicking around anywhere because I use them quite a bit. They're ideal for doing this type of lettering. I like this one because it kind of looks like chalk when it's on here, and that lends itself very well to sort of this old-fashioned chalkboard look. So I'm going to use my Posca pen for this. So give it a good shake, prime it on your palette, just pump it up and down a couple of times till you get a good flow of paint. And then take your time going over your lettering. I'm particularly fond of this font. This one looks very much like a person's handwriting, which appeals to me. So it works very well for this particular application. So you could write whatever you want on this. You could also use a rigger brush to do this lettering. It's a simple font, so it's very easy to do with a brush. Or you could use the gel pen. Any of them is going to work just fine. So I'm going to dry that real quick. And then I'm going to draw on a nice little curly tail, because this is a pig after all. He needs a curly tail. And I'm going to put it over here because I like him to have a curly tail. So nice spirally little tail over here. Now I'm going to make sure that this is good and dry, and then we're going to spatter this lightly with a little bit of thinned titanium white or warm white. Either one will work just fine. So a little bit of thinned warm white or titanium white. I like a little bit of spatter, and again, I kind of like the chalkboard look, the old French sandwich board look of this. So I'm going to lightly spatter this with a little bit of warm white. Just a little, it doesn't need much. And you can make it as heavy a spatter or as light a spatter as you like. That's entirely up to you. And then I'm going to grab one of the stands for this piece. And I'll show you how to install it. Oh, I thought there was one in there. I have to go get one. This is a very clever little stand for this piece. It comes in 2 pieces, and it comes with the pig. So you've got this little nifty little stand. I'm going to make sure that this is dry because it's me, and I will smear it because I'm just that talented. So make sure that this is good and dry so I don't smear anything anywhere. And I'm going to flip this over. And the craft glue that I like to use is this one. This is Art Glitter Dries Clear Designer Adhesive. This one is fabulous. And you're going to apply a nice little bead of this glue to the back of the stand. And line it up so it's roughly in the center of the pig. And the bottom edge of the stand faces and lines up with the bottom of the pig. And then press it firmly into place. What I love about this glue is that it sets up very quickly and it dries very quickly as well. So it is the ideal glue for this type of an application. So once it's completely dry, then it's ready to stand up. Now you have a couple of options after that. You can leave this piece out if you plan on mailing it to someone or giving it as a gift and slipping it into an envelope or what have you. You can leave it out and then they can install it afterwards. Or you can put a bead of glue inside the groove, just a tiny bead. You don't need a lot of glue. And then slide or drop this little wedge into the slot at the back and let it dry. It is such a clever design, such a super little stand for this. If you like to have things painted on the back, which normally I do, I would just simply paint the whole thing black before I spray this with 1 or 2 light coats of Decor matte spray. And there you have it, our Soups On mini menu board sill sitter kitchen pig. I love this design. I think it's simple. I think it's very effective and it's so easy to do. This would make a great Mother's Day gift for if you're looking for something last minute. They're fast to do. And this design translates very easily to a variety of surfaces. You can enlarge it or even make it smaller if you like. Super easy project to do. I hope you guys really enjoyed this one. It's a lot of fun to paint. So that's our little kitchen pig. I love this little project. I think it's super cute. Next week, we're going to be doing the little sheep, which is the third in the series for this little sill sitter series. Boy, say that 3 times fast. We're going to be doing another type of flower on that. I wanted to do something that was simple and fun and effective for all skill levels. I love this little kitchen pig. I think he's super cute. Makes a great little Mother's Day gift. Everybody have a fabulous weekend. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you here live next Saturday. We're going to be painting our little sheep. So I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.